Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see some familiar faces in the audience, I think. Welcome to this presentation on the landscape of challenges and opportunities for EdTech in bilingual schools in China. I'm Ian Hunter, I'm the CCO of WCBS, and I'll be joined shortly by Anna from DIT, who's going to do a short part of this presentation. Firstly, I'd like to thank DIT for inviting me to do this today. I'm going to be talking for about the next 20 minutes or so, and then there'll be 10 minutes at the end for questions if you have any, and answers if I have them. I think it's safe to say that this particular topic could pretty much last all afternoon if we wanted it to. So there's a lot we won't cover, and I'm happy to pick up afterwards. And we have a stand G260 if anybody wants to come by if they've got any additional questions. I thought it best to start by establishing our credentials to talk about this subject. So you've all kindly turned up, and you probably want to know why we think we know something about this. So traditionally, WCBS has sold our MIS and finance systems. So we've typically sold them to independent schools in the UK or international schools. And coming into Bett 2015, we had a very small number of schools that we work with in Hong Kong, but nothing at all in mainland China. And so that's only 2 years ago, Bett 2015. However, now we've got we work with over 50 schools in China, and they're made up of government schools or private or bilingual schools and international schools. And that number's growing rapidly. And so that's the journey that I want to focus on over the next 15, 20 minutes or so. It seems pretty obvious to say what was the attraction of China. I think it's pretty obvious to all. And that's the fact that the addressable market is simply huge. If you look at government schools, for instance, they number about 300,000. So 300,000 government schools. If you add in kindergartens, there's about another 660,000. So in the round, for government schools, you're looking at just under about 1 million schools. From the point of view of international schools, then there's about 100, just over 100, and the typical international schools for children of foreign workers. And that number is pretty much plateauing, with a slight decline in the pupil numbers, the student numbers. But according to ISC research, the number of private Chinese or bilingual schools has increased threefold over the since 2011, so over the last 5 years. And it's expected to continue to grow at that sort of rate. So the topic is a pertinent one, because that's the area that we're going to focus on, because that's the area where there's significant growth. So these private or bilingual schools are effectively like independent schools in the UK. They're private schools for Chinese children of Chinese passport holders. This, coupled with China generally opening up its borders and welcoming dialogue with the UK, and in particular with UK education. The opportunities in China, I think, for UK EdTech have never been better. And actually, you could argue that they've never been easier also. I attended a DIT trade mission to Beijing and Shanghai in September, along with 18, 19 other EdTech companies. And that was from an array of different specialities, and they were selected by DIT to attend that event. And every one of us could see the potential to introduce our products to what was a very receptive market. So over 4 days, sounds very grand, we played to packed houses. So there was people from schools, from local government, from national government, from universities, all very receptive to the messaging about UK EdTech products being introduced into China. However, whilst I think we can all agree that there's a huge amount of potential and there's significant opportunities in China, if you're contemplating entering that market, one of the things that I think is very important is that you are very clear about what problems or challenges you are trying to help resolve for the Chinese market, rather than just seeing it as a natural extension of your market to sell your product. I'll talk a little bit later about having a greater understanding of the market, but for us, we identified a clear requirement for what it is we do. And I'll use a live example to demonstrate that. So HD Ningbo is a school that's part of the elite K-12 group in China, and it's a bilingual school for families who seek an authentic international education. A blend of Chinese curriculum and international education philosophy. And one of their main challenges was the need to change the cultural learning expectations of their parents and their teachers from purely a ranking-based, league table-based environment or philosophy to something that focused on every individual child's learning progress. Coupled with that, there was a very obvious need for them to be able to communicate between teachers and parents and to work with solutions that they could access bilingually. So, particularly in this private bilingual market, remember, some of the children may be able to speak English, but their parents might not be able to. So that ability to converse in Chinese or English or a combination of both was very important to them. Will Percy, who's the deputy head at HD Ningbo, said recently, giving parents access to data on their children's learning progress through their parent portal gives them something to talk to the school about. And that was something they wished to really encourage. And helps them to engage with the school and with their child in a meaningful way. And he talked about an integrated system that is flexible to the needs of the school. And they've been able to choose software providers to work with from around the world and from within China. And by playing to our strengths, WCBS strengths, for reporting, communication, and such like, but adding functionality from these other third parties that integrated with them. So we're partnering with a number of software providers to ensure that we can effectively integrate within a single sign-on system within that school. And that was very important to them. But for me, it was a real example of UK EdTech being applied to overcome a real challenge in Chinese education in a bilingual school. So we were able to address that requirement with our portfolio, bringing them something that they didn't have locally. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, there's an excellent case study on that particular school and that site, which highlights the use of our bilingual communication systems, both to facilitate the change in culture and that need for bilingual communication. But we've examples in other schools that we work with where they have been relying heavily on Excel and paperwork. Not a challenge that's uncommon, that's only common in China. It's common worldwide that schools still have this reliance on Excel, and so therefore, it not being unique to China, it gave us the opportunity to work with those schools in a way that we would work with schools in Middle East, UK, Far East, wherever. So solving the same sorts of problems, but again with a bilingual solution for their bilingual schools. So again, I would offer or suggest that you need to be clear about what problems you're looking to help them resolve. Before I carry on, I'm going to introduce Anna. She's got a couple of things to cover, which I think is down on one of these slides as policy updates. There. But that's going to flip on, so I'll leave you to it.
I'm Anna Shotbolt, and I'm based in the British Embassy in Beijing as head of the education team in China. Danny Pan is my colleague, also based in Beijing, and I've got colleagues in Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing and Guangzhou. So together we cover the whole of China, and we work across all different subsectors of education, so EdTech obviously, but also international schools and vocational education, professional education and early years education. So I think I was just going to set out a bit about kind of what I do, a bit of the kind of policy landscape, and some of the key kind of decision makers when heading out to China. So I apologise if I overlap with anything that you're about to say. So as I said, I'm based in Beijing, and we also have a team in London. So the two of us work together to bring delegations out. And as Ian mentioned, WCBS was part of that in September, and we had 20 companies come out. And what we, and obviously they're sourced from the London side. And what we do in China is get together lots of qualified potential investors and buyers that are interested in UK products. So we do that. We're doing that currently at the minute. We've got a delegation of Chinese companies and government officials that are interested in buying. So that's kind of what DIT do. So the delegation that we've got out at the minute are a mixture of government officials, of schools, of companies, and an education magazine to help kind of advertise UK companies. And I think that delegation is quite interesting because it shows the mixture of the decision makers that are in China. So we have government officials from provincial, from local government basically, of different provinces in Beijing and Chengdu. They procure on behalf of kind of hundreds and thousands of schools. As Ian just suggested, the scale is obviously huge in China. But we also have, it's also worth kind of getting to know individual schools because teachers have quite a lot of sway with those procurement officials. And we also have companies that are out here. So EdTech companies that have their own products but are also interested in buying UK and other foreign products and services to then sell in China, given their contacts and knowledge of kind of regulations and contacts with officials in order to sell. So that's kind of the makeup of the delegation we've got here. And also as DIT, we work very closely with the national government, who often will buy at scale, but given the scale of China, will often come down to provinces. So they for instance, I've been hearing about speaking with Saudi officials, and the government will just decide something and it goes into all the schools. It's not obviously quite that simple in China. So that is what we're doing at the minute, and we'll take out future delegations both ways. So if you're interested, that's always available on our website. In terms of policy changes, the main policy change in China at the minute thankfully doesn't really affect EdTech so much. So there's quite a change in the government's thoughts about these dual curriculum schools that you're mentioning. Obviously, international schools is a great sector and buyer of products like this, but there's a limit to the number of international schools. In China, international schools can only recruit foreign passport holders. So there's a move for UK schools and other international schools to open dual curriculum schools, bilingual schools that can recruit Chinese passport holders, and we've been working and promoting that. But there'll be new regulations coming in towards the end of this year, whereby the Chinese government are getting a lot stricter about exactly what is taught in those schools, how much of the Chinese curriculum is being taught, and what the content of the international curriculum is taught. So again, that mainly will impact on schools setting up, but in terms of EdTech providers and selling services to those schools, I think there's just that knowledge that the government and therefore the schools will be looking for localized products that teach the curriculum and kind of tick those boxes. So we found a lot in this week on the delegation's day of this week of the schools and the government officials wanting to see things that are already localized. Because if it's your first kind of step into China, fair enough, you don't have the products in Chinese, but I think it's worth doing that preparation so that you can properly show what it would look like if you were in China. And then thinking about the things that the delegation here this week, and also from conversations in China, there are kind of a number of specific things that China is looking for, things that they feel that potentially they could get better outside of China. That's mainly around teacher and pupil assessment. So they're interested in technology that can show the progress of students and be able to tailor the teacher's teaching to different pupils, and to be able to assess teachers. So they're interested in things like that. Obviously, English language is a big sell point that the UK has, and that's something that they're interested in doing. They teach English language right from the beginning, from early years, and so particularly online and courses that can teach students, they're interested in that. And then lastly, hardware. So a lot of the delegation this week have said we want to see things that we can touch. We don't just want everything online, especially given some of the restrictions around the internet. So they're looking for different things that students can kind of touch and play with, 3D printers, that kind of thing. They've enjoyed seeing those. And then I was going to talk lastly on procurement. I think I touched on just in explaining the makeup of the delegation are people from different areas, so government, schools, private business, international schools. So a lot of procurement is done through government, and therefore that's where we can help. If you're interested in coming to China, and you need kind of advice around that, then we can help in DIT. But then the kind of easier step, if you want to make your first step into China, is through the international market, because the schools can buy direct from you and are obviously more interested in English language products. So that was all I was going to say. I'll hand
Thanks,
back
Danny.
to Ian.
And I guess that would be one of my first takeaway points. If you do have designs on introducing your products or services into China, align yourself with DIT or BISA or CBBC. There are people there doing this work already, and if you align yourselves with them, you can avoid making some of the mistakes that others, including ourselves, have made. And the thing that attracts you to China is also one of the biggest challenges that you face, and that is the scale. And how do you address the scale? Where on earth do you start? One of the most important things for me, if you're considering doing this, is to identify yourself a partner to work with in China. They will know the market, they know its languages, they know its customs, but above all, they should be able to demonstrate a network of contacts and relationships that will open doors in China that will take you far, far longer to achieve, even if you ever could achieve it. So identifying a partner is pretty critical. But there are other challenges and pitfalls. Don't expect your product to just fit. Inevitably, it won't. There will be the need to change. It's such a huge and diverse and different market. And so localization extends far beyond just Google Translate. So you've got to get a much greater level of localization. And it's an area that we've been challenged with, along with the pace of the change that's required. But once you're aware of the concept of Chinese time and Western time, then you become aware of what's driving the need for change. We're from Glastonbury in the West Country, and if you add West Country time into that equation, West Country time is about as far from Western time as Western time is from Chinese time. So we're getting there, but there's a huge requirement for development quicker to address the market. And one of the pitfalls, as an example, that we came across early on was the lack of email usage in China. So given that we have a product that's predicated on email notifications to staff, students, and pupils, if they don't use email, then you've got a bit of a challenge ahead. And so one of the things we identified quite early is that there's about 1 billion users of WeChat, which we hadn't used at all. So now, therefore, it was really important that we got our notifications and our communications through WeChat rather than relying on an email function that they didn't really use. So again, further localizing our solution. So once you've got your product more or less localized, you need to then make sure you're doing the same with everything that surrounds it. And I'll be quick with this because it's obvious, but I think it needs to be said. With international schools, which we've worked with for years, they're typically British international schools, and you're dealing with them in English, whether it's support or training, you're providing that in English. The minute you start talking to bilingual schools, then typically they will want their support and their training in Chinese. So having that, it's an obvious thing, but thinking about that before you go into the market. Are your training materials in Chinese? it's not just the product, it's everything that surrounds it. Adding to that, the fact that how are you going to support those schools when for 6 months of the year the time difference is 8 hours, and when you're going to bed they're just getting up. So we've got to weigh all of that up. On the flip side, success when it comes can be really quick and potentially large, because as Anna mentioned, in some cases, it's a bit like the old UK local authority model, that procurement can happen on behalf of a city or on behalf of a province. And when you think about the UK and you think, oh, a city, well, that's not a very large procurement. Well, in some of this, it's not uncommon for a city to have 800 schools. So there's a mind-blowing scale when you start to look at that. Therefore, depending on your view, you might think, well, you've only got 50 schools. That's not very good, is it? And I must admit, I'm a bit frustrated that it's not 1,500 or 15,000. I'd like that by next year, please. But by people I talk to, I'm told that that's quite astonishing growth from a standing start within 2 years. For me, people worry about IP and worry about entering the market, restrictions. But it's all about getting the right advice for me, working with the right people. You know, if your marketing is done via Facebook only and your engine that drives everything is Google, then you're going to have some problems in China because they're not supported, but they're fairly obvious things. But for me, the simplicity of a few well-executed actions. Get yourself a contract with your partner, and they will be pushing you to have a contract too. So you have a legally binding document in China. Get some advice, get some good advice. The likes of CBBC give you great advice along with DIT. They produce things like the China Business Handbook, Made in China 2025, Belt and Road, all things about knowing your market, knowing the history of the market, and it's really important that you know the strategy. In our case, the 13th five-year plan, which was the top-down drive from the government for education information, enabled us to clearly position ourselves in the 3 connections, 2 platforms strategy, thereby clearly helping us provide a solution to a real challenge in the schools. But again, I won't do DIT and CBBC's job for them. Look at their website. There's a huge amount of advice there that you could take advantage of. One other bit of advice, something I wish somebody had said to us 2 years ago, is don't rush. Don't rush into something that you might regret. Don't rush into something because it's there. It's a brilliant experience working with China. They are expert negotiators, and before you know it, you're down a road that you weren't quite expecting. So don't rush, there's no hurry, and don't be rushed. And I'm just about finished. The slideshow's been around about 30 or 40 times now. I was asked to put a slide up that covered two points. One is the most important thing I've said. Now, that's from my perspective, not from yours, and you may disagree. But it's very much about use the skills and expertise that's there. Fall back on that. Don't plow your own furrow when it's already been plowed before. Follow the advice, work with people, align yourself with people, and you'll be fine. And the last thing is, what should you do if nothing else? I would suggest taking a massive step back and working out whether China is the market for you, because it is going to require lots of change, lots of localization, and for the company culture to change if you're going to be successful. You need to be there. You need to be visible. You need to be on the ground. And you need to be prepared to localize beyond just the product that you sell. But it's really worth it. It's a fantastic experience. It's hard work. It's fast. It's changeable. But it's a great market to be involved in.